The Library of Alexandria, the largest collection of ancient knowledge in its time, only to be destroyed by nobody is completely sure. But what knowledge did it house? What secrets were lost in the text that we no longer have? Or were they even lost at all? Perhaps it's more likely they were simply taken underground and stolen by the elites of the time, forbidden from seeing the light of day and exposing their secret advanced knowledge to the public. My name is Andrew, and you're watching Tales of the Old World. Real quick, before we get into this one, I just wanted to show you guys our new merch real quick. You may have noticed our slightly more refined logo, so I put it on a shirt. And not only that, but we have the night version and the Renaissance version. That one's my favorite. Plus, I created a whole collection of historical shirts that incorporate beautiful historic artworks, historic imagery, and some funny ones in there as well. So you'll have to go check those out at talesoftheoldworld.com. Alright, so the Library of Alexandria dates back to around the 3rd century BC. Actually, even its creation is debated among scholars. That's how little we really know about it. All of this comes from mentions in historical texts, fragments of surviving documents, and writings from historians of the different time periods during and after its existence. So we know definitively that there was a library in Alexandria, and we have estimates on how many texts were held there. It's generally believed by modern scholars to be around 40,000 scrolls and 40,000 books. But ancient historians claimed there were upwards of 600 to 700,000 scrolls held within its walls at its peak. But even if that insane number isn't true, 40,000 is still larger than anything at the time. What we know for certain is that this was the greatest storehouse of knowledge in its day. No other library of the time compared to this vast amount of knowledge that was held in the Library of Alexandria. And nobody in its time realized how privileged they were to have access to all those ancient texts. There were no doubt hundreds, maybe even thousands of writings from people like Aristotle and Socrates, ancient Jewish Old Testament prophets, ancient Egyptian mystics from the Old Kingdom and pre-dynastic era, including early alchemy texts, lost Phoenician maps showing their expansive trade networks reaching places like Britain or all around Africa, and even as far as India and Southeastern Asia, rumored to also include places as far as the Americas and Far East Asia and Australia. But that's only scratching the surface. There's much more we need to discuss here. First off, if you want to go deep into the different theories as to how the library was destroyed, I suggest you go watch this video you see on the screen by the channel Esoterica. I love this guy's videos. This was one of the ones I watched during my research for this, and he really breaks down everything well. But the basics are that nobody really knows for sure how it was destroyed. Historical writings give us conflicting accounts. Some say it was destroyed in a fire caused by the armies of Julius Caesar in 48 BC during his siege of Alexandria. Others claimed it survived much longer, up until the year 391 AD when it was destroyed by Christian mobs, some say. Other scholars will claim it was destroyed during the Muslim conquest of Alexandria. And some chalk it up as a slow, gradual decline rather than just one fateful moment. But what we know for sure is that it indeed existed. It held the most knowledge among any library of its time, and it no longer exists, and many of its texts are lost forever. But what texts were there in its golden days, and could any of these survive in private collections? The sad truth is there are thousands of texts that we know existed at one time, from references, legends, and fragments that we simply do not have anymore. The lost works of Homer, the missing dialogues of Aristotle, the lost description of Archimedes' Antikythera mechanism, histories from some of the earliest civilizations like Babylon, Persia, and Egypt. Huge sections of Roman history are missing. The Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and Judah is included in that list. So is the foundational text to Zoroastrianism. All gone. But a lot of these still existed during the time of the Library of Alexandria. These and so many more. So first, to deduce what was most likely lost at the destruction of the library, we need to take a bird's eye view of the historical context of the time. First off, this was a wide time frame. This library was built sometime shortly after Alexander the Great conquered the region and renamed the city to Alexandria in the 330s BC. This whole era that followed Alexander's conquest saw the Hellenization of the East and Mediterranean, and the Greeks wanted to find all the ancient knowledge from these far-off places and translate their texts into Greek. That's why this place was so special for the time. It had all these sacred ancient texts and knowledge from these very old civilizations, all in one place and in one language. It was really a fruition point where all the different peoples who were scattered out from Babylon or Mesopotamia during the Tower of Babel story in the Bible reconnected and reorganized into a common language, only to combine all the different versions of their ancient stories and all these advancements in philosophies that they've learned over those 2,000 years. And not only did this library contain the most diverse collection of ancient texts dating all the way back to the dawn of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates River, and possibly even earlier, but the library itself also survived well into the Christian era after Constantine split the Roman Empire, and possibly even surviving up until the Muslim Golden Age, where even more texts and knowledge from the East, going even beyond Persia to India and China, were being gathered together and translated into Arabic and studied by the Arab philosophers and alchemists. So the library combined ancient knowledge from places as far as North Africa, Europe, and even the very far east through Silk Road trade routes. This was the main hub of surviving mysticism from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and where the very, very ancient alchemical writings were preserved. But what exactly does this all mean? What were the specific things that were kept here that we no longer have? What knowledge did these scholars write down in these books? And what exactly happened to them? Now, the first mystery that this library held that I want to talk about was the lost texts of Plato. Plato, like many Greek philosophers, is known to have both lost and unfinished texts. And no doubt the Library of Alexandria would have taken a special interest in acquiring all of his writings. But one of his unfinished works stands out to me, and makes me curious as to whether or not the finished text actually existed at some point. And that is the story of Atlantis from Plato's Timaeus and Critias. But this was meant to be a trilogy, with the last text, Hermocrates, was said to have never been written. But why would Plato abandon such an important history? Or did this third part to the Atlantis story share just a bit too much detail for it to be allowed to be read by the general public? Remember, Plato said this story was told to him by Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests, whose works are also lost to us, but would have no doubt been housed at the Library of Alexandria, if they survived up until that time. But if Plato knew them, then it's likely they survived into and past the age of Plato, who lives only 100 years or so before the library's construction. And again, along with the Greek, the Library of Alexandria made it a specific point to obtain and translate into Greek all the ancient Egyptian writings. This would have absolutely included the works of Solon, and possibly a more detailed version of Plato's Atlantis story, sharing more ancient history than we even know today. Not only that, but this library was known to have ancient maps that are completely lost to us now. A person of this time period could go down a whole rabbit hole of reading about the Atlantis story and other flood myths from other cultures, and then use these ancient maps along with descriptions of the world beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and literally discover the Americas, or at least theorize of their existence. Aristotle actually had works where he theorized the existence of other continents, to balance the world, so to speak. And those works could no doubt be found here too. And there's others. Eratosthenes, the inventor of latitude and longitude lines, and the first to calculate the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy. He also made a world map that is now lost to us, along with a full text describing the geography of the world that no longer exists. Guess what? This guy was the chief librarian at Alexandria, and called the father of geography. Based on later writings referencing his lost text and map, he divided the Earth into 5 climate zones, much like Aristotle theorized. 2 frigid polar zones, 2 temperate zones, and 1 torrid equatorial tropical zone. It's been criticized by writers like Strabo for being too mathematical, but based on descriptions it's thought to have shown a roughly rectangular or parallelogram-shaped landmass, centered on the Mediterranean, extending from Western Europe to India, with Africa, or Libya as they called it, to the south, and parts of Asia to the east. Oceans surrounded it, and unknown regions lie beyond. But what are these unknown regions? We have no way of knowing, but it could have been the inspiration for later maps, or for explorers like Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus, to find these lands beyond. And this was a very popular map at the time. It's said to have been placed in over 400 cities and regions, and yet none of these examples exist, to the best of our knowledge. However, some of the earliest modern-day maps, which show things like the Azores, Canary Islands, Americas, and just plain old theoretical lands beyond, are said to have drawn largely from earlier reference maps. The Piri-Reis map from 1513 is the best example of this. Only a fragment of this one exists, but it shows South America and the Caribbean perfectly. Actually closer to how they looked when the oceans were much lower around 10 to 12,000 years ago, oddly enough. But it's known to have been based off earlier source maps that we no longer have. The Library of Alexandria could have, and probably did, house many of these lost maps. Possibly even maps of old Phoenician trade routes that extend far out into the unknown lands. And the scholars of the time had access to all of these in one place, in Alexandria. In addition to these lost Greek and Egyptian texts and ancient maps, the library also would have held sacred religious texts. There may have been lost mythological stories from Greece and Egypt, or the Near East, but one thing scholars are pretty certain about is the existence of extra-biblical ancient Jewish texts. Think the Dead Sea Scrolls, which itself is mostly fragments. The library would have held many of these sacred Jewish texts, like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, writings from early Jewish patriarchs and prophets, and they even had one of the oldest translations of the Torah into Greek, known as the Septuagint, a text that Jesus and the apostles were often known to reference in the New Testament. It actually contains some books and details that later Masoretic text doesn't. Most Bible translations today are taken from the Masoretic text, the standard Hebrew text of Judaism meticulously compiled and preserved by the Masoretes from the 6th to the 10th century AD. But there is an older version, the Septuagint, and it was first created in the Library of Alexandria. The primary source for this claim is the letter of Aristeas, a Jewish Hellenistic text written around the 2nd century BC, likely 150 to 100 BC. It describes how King Ptolemy, the second ruler of Egypt, wanted to include the Jewish Torah in his great library. His librarian, Demetrius of Phalerum, advised that it needed translation from Hebrew into Greek. So Ptolemy requested 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, from the high priest Eleazar in Jerusalem. The story goes that these scholars each worked on their own translations in their groups of 6 and came up with 12 versions. Miraculously, as if by divine intervention, all 12 of the translations were said to be the exact same. Modern scholars chalk this up as embellishment, but they agree the Septuagint was created and copied and distributed in the Library of Alexandria. And who knows what other sacred Jewish texts were held there too. More Jews lived in Alexandria than in Israel at the time. It's likely that all their ancient texts, including those not included in the modern Bible, possibly holding the knowledge of the pre-flood world, the Nephilim giants, clues to the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, and ancient history we can only speculate about today, were held in this library. Jesus Christ himself may have even visited and studied scriptures at the library in his youth. The Bible does say that Jesus lived among these ancient Egyptian Jews, in Egypt for the first few years of his life. He may have even had family in the area, and no doubt would have likely visited the library at some point to at least see the original Septuagint Torah, and who knows what else, study there possibly. On top of the lost texts, maps, and lost religious texts, the Library of Alexandria would have also held secrets to science and inventions of the time. The Greeks had inventions that were so advanced for the time that we still don't fully understand how they made some of these today. The first being the Antikythera mechanism. This was essentially the most advanced calendar/astronomical tracker until the modern age of telescopes and the digital age. Think Aztec calendar but mechanized. This thing could precisely track the positions of the sun, moon, zodiac, moon phases, planets Mercury through Saturn, even going as far as to model their irregular motions. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses a decade in advance. and it followed multiple calendars: the 19-year metric lunar cycle, a 76-year Calippic cycle, even a 4-year Olympiad cycle for the Panhellenic Games, and several more. It combined Babylonian astronomical cycles with Greek geometric models in a compact, gear-driven machine. If an astrologer or diviner were to get their hands on this mechanism, they would claim it could literally predict the future. This version was found in a shipwreck in the Aegean Sea dating back to around 100 or so years after the great Greek scientist Archimedes, but it's often credited as originally being designed after a version that he created. And the Library of Alexandria was said to have housed all of his great works. So some theorize it held the secret to what this device was, or what it was used for, and how it was created. Some scholars today go as far as to say some of these inventions held at the library could have jump-started an industrial revolution in ancient times, if they had not been destroyed and lost. Some other inventions rumored to have had instructions to them stored in the library was Greek fire, the napalm-like substance used in ancient Greek naval battles, or the secrets to plastics, an anonymous Roman inventor who was said to have created unbreakable glass that regains its shape when dented. Some theorize it was a crude version of plastic. Or the first steam engine, created by Hero of Alexandria, known as Hero's engine. Or possibly even early theories surrounding electricity, calculus, or other breakthroughs like the atomic theories from Democritus, and other things along those lines. Or maybe they studied the ancient Babylonian star charts and writings that tell of planets beyond Saturn, that we can't really explain how they knew of because Saturn is the farthest visible planet to us, with the naked eye. But in ancient Mesopotamia, it seems they knew there were more beyond it. We just don't know how they knew. And then there's the lost knowledge of the ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, and Far Eastern alchemy. The hermetic texts themselves said to have originally come from ancient Egyptian wisdom and magic, created by Hermes Trismegistus, equated to the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes. These texts, said to be based on earlier Egyptian, Greek, and even Babylonian traditions, were first written down in Alexandria and kept in the library. Today, most of these texts are completely gone. Only fractions of them remain. There's the Corpus Hermeticum, Asclepius, the Emerald Tablet, the Nag Hammadi text discovered in 1945, and then there's a few other fragments and short texts too, but the majority of them were completely lost. There was originally said to be 42 priestly books, but what we have is just remnants of that. But this is where things start to get pretty suspicious. It seems pretty convenient to me that all these great texts full of ancient mystical knowledge and powerful wisdom could be lost so easily, and there's not even a clear-cut answer as to how or even when it happened. I think it's more likely that some powerful elites of the time saw the distribution of power through knowledge to the masses in Alexandria, and he thought to himself, how powerful could I be if I was the only one who knew these secrets of the universe, and how easily fooled would the public be when I take their greatest source of wisdom? And he took these lost texts and covered it up. So if you ask me, I think these lost texts could still be somewhere out there, hidden away by the most powerful royal families, or hidden in deep vaults of large old institutions like the Vatican. Or some even theorize that it was co-opted into Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. The Germans sought after some of these things during World War II, and no doubt many powerful modern elites have too. The elites knew and know of the power that was in these texts. One story I find interesting is the rediscovery of the hermetic texts during the Renaissance in the 15th century, when ancient Greek texts were being recovered and translated into Latin after centuries of limited access to Western Europe, and when the Corpus Hermeticum was acquired by Cosimo de' Medici, a member of the extremely rich and powerful Medici family. He brought it to his translator Marsilio Ficino, and had him drop everything he was doing, which was translating the great works of Plato, to start working on the Corpus Hermeticum, because they believed, which modern scholars are now insistent that it's false, that these texts dated back thousands of years to the time of Moses and even earlier Egyptian wisdom. Apparently the translator, Ficino, was nearing the end of his life, and he wanted to read this, quote, primordial wisdom before he died. The translation was massively influential on the Renaissance age, sparking interest in mysticism, magic, and alchemy. And these texts are very interesting to read, and contain both real and more mystical knowledge. But these are only scratching the surface of the real hermetic texts, the ones that are supposedly now lost to us. But is it that far-fetched to believe that someone like this ultra-powerful Medici family could have obtained these lost texts, and instead of translating them for the public, keeping them for themselves? Seems like something the rich and powerful would do. But what knowledge were they gatekeeping? Well, we can only speculate, but many say these texts held the secrets of spiritual ascension into enlightenment or gnosis, cosmology, the secrets of human physiology and human nature, discussions on good and evil and free will, and the role of spiritual entities in human affairs. Also secrets to longevity, or possibly even the philosopher's stone. And lastly, magic, invoking the gods, animating the undead, and performing rituals. This includes the study of astrology and astronomy, alchemy, and medicine and pharmacology. But again, we can only speculate as to what the specific details were. Some other things that we didn't mention that may have been stored at the Library of Alexandria were detailed accounts on the Sumerian and Egyptian kings list that claim the ancient kings lived for thousands of years, and they say the first kings were gods. There also could have been details on the flood myths. We talked about Atlantis, but there could have been more details on the Epic of Gilgamesh, the biblical flood of Noah, the Persian flood myth, or even the Chinese and Indian flood myths. Some speculate there also could have been maps or writings further detailing unknown lands at the time, like Hyperborea, or the land to the east known as Ceres in Greek writings, where man is said to live well past 100 years. Or maybe there's details on the location of the Fountain of Youth from Greek myth, a place said to have been visited by Alexander the Great on his conquests. Or maybe they even had details on the Younger Dryas period, or texts explaining astrology as a true provable mathematical science. The question is, did any of this survive? I believe the answer is absolutely. And whether it's hidden in the vaults of the Vatican, the castles and mansions of the super elite, or it's still buried in the yet unexcavated spot where the library stood, or locked away in some secret vault somewhere, it's out there. And a lot of these ancient prophecies we like to look into in some of these videos say that in the end days of man, a lot of this ancient knowledge will be again revealed to us. One can only hope and search. Thank you guys so much for watching this one. Don't forget to go check out our new merch. And also, any book that was mentioned here is added to our book list. It's a list on the website of all the books we reference here and some that I personally read. And if you buy them through the affiliate links on our website, a percentage of that goes to supporting the channel. For this video, I added all those hermetic texts mentioned, and one recommended by that channel I mentioned, Esoterica, called Libraries Before Alexandria. Looks like a very good one if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole. Go subscribe to our Patreon. Thank you so much to all of you that are already members there. Go leave us a comment down in the comment section letting me know your thoughts on this one, and I will see you guys in the next one.